So, today we're going to talk about selling a company. Does HR have a role in staging the house, so to speak? And if so, what is that? We're going to talk about that coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on this show, we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. And today, my guest is Lindsay Osmond. Lindsay is a business optimization executive and a former VP of Human Resources and Labor Relations. I've worked with her and I know her competence on the topic. Hi, Lindsay, how are you?
Great. Thanks so much, Andrea, for having me here today.
Well, thanks for coming on. So I don't usually ask people about their backgrounds, but yours is curious, having gone from HR to business optimization. So a couple questions about that. One, what is business optimization? And two, how did a career in HR lead to that?
So, in terms of what is business optimization, sometimes, Andrea, I just think we create fancy titles or fancy words just to explain things along the way.
Yes.
So, when I talk about optimization, I really talk about how can I leverage the three P's? One, people; two, processes and infrastructure; to equal profitability or productive environments or productivity, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what I think about when I talk about being an optimizer. I optimize organizations by creating clarity. A lot of times when there's a whole bunch of chaos, and in that I do that through people and processes to be able to impact profitability. And so, how did I get here? Sometimes in our career, we stop and we're like, how did that ever happen? And my gift that I give to Syncrude was once upon a time, I was seconded to what was called a business controls project. And we were really a joint venture that was pulled in, seconded to a joint venture to get Syncrude CSOX compliant. And what that is a legislation that was introduced to ensure that publicly traded companies, for the most part, are doing and delivering what they say they are doing. And they do that by ensuring that risk is being controlled to the appropriate level. And so that's called your risk framework or your controls framework. And then we self assessed against that. And then we went to the body to get a certificate. So inherently, that's kind of how I ended up moving from what I would call a strict HR portfolio into a more business focused portfolio. And I was really young at the time, and I was so grateful to be introduced to these really more mature and seasoned individuals in their career. And our role was to map all the business processes across the enterprise and then understand every single one of our risks that would impact the financial statements, build controls around those, and then implement them, teach them, implement them, and then test to see if they were implemented. So that's how I really found out that, yes, I was trained and schooled in HR, but really I come at things with a business lens, a business focus with a people bend to me. And that's how I kind of ended up in this business optimization, efficiency optimization pathway.
Hmm. I think a lot of people in HR would think that they do what you've just described, but like narrowly when it comes to just the people processes.
I think that's true. I think the difference for me was really a lot of the portfolio wasn't people related at all. I was finance and upgrading and extraction and all the places. And a lot of controls and a lot of businesses actually, or things within organizations happen without people, right? And so, how do you actually manage and understand the full risk of the organization? For example, like climate change. How does climate change, how does that directly impact people? Well, we're typically a mitigation point, or in some cases, we cause it. Some yeah, that's how come I say I kind of transitioned a little bit. But I would agree with you. People often in HR think that they or navigate down the same pathway.
Right, but, like, focusing on what I really wanted to talk about, which is, um, ultimately HR's role in mergers and acquisitions.
Mhm.
So talk to me about HR's role in mergers and acquisitions.
Hopefully, hopefully, and I think sometimes, unfortunately, HR doesn't get a seat at the table, and I think that's a miss from the organization from a strategic perspective. When I look at merger and acquisitions and M&A activity as a whole, there's very few examples in our world of a true merger that's gone really, really well. Typically, there's one body, one of the organizations that typically has more power, more authority, more money, more legislative compliance than the other. And sometimes we're trying to find a way to make those two bodies work together. And so, what I think HR's role is in this whole process is really to understand the business need. Why are we looking at a place of either divesting of a company or buying the company? And how is this aligned to our strategic imperative? And the reason why I think that's really important is depending on the why and what is the business problem we're trying to solve along the way is really going to drive how we manage the people portfolio to support that transaction.
Can you give me, like, a tangible example?
Yeah. So sometimes in M&A activity, we are selling assets. Call it an asset sale, where I'm taking a building, a piece of equipment or whatever, and I'm going to sell that. There could be very little people impact along the way. You're really taking a tangible, for the most part, a tangible thing, and you're giving it to somebody else, another company, for the cost of that a valued item. The other thing that we can do is we can talk about more of a, a stock deal or a whole encompassing deal, a value deal, where the whole portion of an organization, people, liabilities, assets, the whole shebang is kind of packaged all up and we're going to sell it to somebody else. And when we're doing that, there could be a couple things that happen along the way. One, if our people processes aren't in order along the way, then that could really derail the deal. Second of all, we really want to ensure that we are presenting the best workforce planning process and the whole, not workforce planning, the whole people strategy in a good realm. So if we have a good people strategy and our people infrastructure is in place, then we're going to be more attractive to a buyer. And the reason why I say that is, in my opinion, the only competitive advantage that a company has today is their people. You can buy technology, you can buy assets, you can buy books of businesses, you can buy almost anything. But what we do know is either through research associated with M&A activity or just sheer looking at research, you can take an organization that was doing really, really well and change out people leaders, and all of a sudden everything is a debacle, right?
Mm, yeah.
And so I think it's really important to think about what exactly is the end deal. What are we trying to accomplish and why? Because even in that process, let's say you get to a deal, part of the process could be to keep some people, to let some people go, to change jurisdictional compliance if you're kind of doing an integration activity. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to be tied to strategy, because the why will help drive how we build the supporting function to be able to walk through a transaction.
Yeah, I wanna circle back to, HR's role in the sale. You said that, having solid people processes is going to make a company more attractive.
Mhm.
How deeply do, people who are thinking about buying another company, how deeply do they dig into the people processes?
Mm. So I think it really depends. I think that it depends on what you're trying to do out of the sale, number one. So if I'm just looking for an asset, I'm not going to dig into it at all.
Yeah.
if I'm looking at taking two existing my business unit and another business unit that performs the same amount of work and the exact same type of work, that means I'm going to probably do an integration between those two people teams, those two business process teams, and I'm going to want to know a little bit more. Sometimes we're buying talent, we're buying a portion of the organization and specific subject matter experts or talent. And in that, I might dig into the people practices even more to understand the talent that's existing in the organization. But for the most part, when you're starting down the path, you really don't know what's going to end up, especially if you're the selling company, right? So you've made a decision, a strategic decision as an organization that this portion of the business doesn't make sense for whatever reason. It may not be aligned with your core business. You might not be able to get a return on it. There are so many reasons why an organization may choose to divest of a portion or all of an organization. And so often as an HR person, you're kind of saying, okay, let's get us ready. Like, let's get us as ready as we can. And sometimes we make a conscious decision that we just want to make it look good to be able to get the sale. And sometimes we really have different kind of values as an organization where we're going to put our best foot forward and demonstrate and be extremely transparent through this process. And so regardless, I think there's a couple things that HR does to prepare. Number one is we need to assess our talent and we need to assess it while reviewing the employment contracts. Because a lot of times with a transaction, we're paying money. So one company is trying to assess how much money they're going to pay for another company. And when you take a look at the HR practices, there are things that cost that are tangible dollar values that you can start to piece out. So great examples of that are employment contracts that have change of control provisions in them or have severance agreements that are actually listed right in the employment contract. Other great examples are pension liability, RSP matching programs, total rewards programs. You'll see us spend a lot of time in that. What is the liability associated with absorbing those types of plans that exist? We also spend time looking at pay practices, right? Like, so if I'm going to buy a company and or participate through the transaction and they have a 6-month vacation policy and they have a whole bunch of liabilities sitting on their balance sheets or their financials about how to pay out 6 months worth of liability. For me, that's something I'm going to look at because that's going to add cost into the transaction, right? So my role, part of due diligence, is to gather all the hard costs and the soft costs that I think it's going to take to get through the transaction to ensure that we can still have a return on investment on the back end.
In your experience, when a company is looking at buying another company, what HR metrics are they looking at most often? Is it the ones you've just named, or are there any others? Are there ones in particular that they care about?
When I'm going through the purchasing process, I typically look at employment contracts. I look at legislative compliance gap. So what jurisdiction are they are they working within and what are the legislative compliances that are associated with that? Accessibility Act, the Equity Pact, equal employer opportunity employer in the US, right? ADOA, those kinds of things, right? So you spend some time looking at the legislation and figuring out if there's compliance gaps. The other thing that I typically look at is what would be the cost or what is going to be the impact from a people perspective in terms of continuity of business. So typically when I'm working through an acquisition with a team, we spend some time thinking about what is the key talent that we need to retain and consciously are we seeing any things that we cause us some alarm or make us feel that that person may not be on the same page or on board with the transaction, and then we need to do something different? So sometimes we look at sale agreements, retention agreements, stay agreements, those kinds of things in the process. And what does the organization, the selling company, put in place as well? Because sometimes they're doing the same thing. You have key people who have to help through the sale of a company, and you need them to stay and have a positive attitude, or things can go really bad, really bad.
Yes.
We also look at legal liability. So we spend some time thinking about what are the open lawsuits, what are the history of the lawsuits, or grievances, arbitration, expedited arbitration, labor board arbitrations or decisions, those types of things, because it will give you a flavor in terms of employment practices and labor practices, specifically aligned with management rights. And then you spend some time kind of thinking about the noise. So typically you'll do site tours. You can kind of get a sense pretty quickly, like you're using a gut a little bit more. I call it the art side of the fence where you're like, ooh, that didn't feel right. Or, oh, that person said that. And I'm like, that doesn't feel right. Right. And you need to start digging into it. So those are some of the things.
You talked about keeping employees engaged in the process. I mean, obviously, like, maybe they're not uncertain about whether or not they want to be working for the next company, whether or not they're even going to have a job in the next company. Can you successfully help someone who's worried about those things keep working with a positive attitude?
Well, to be honest, Andrea, most employees don't even realize when a company is engaging in the due diligence process. Most companies are not transparent to say we're looking at a transaction, and there's multiple reasons why. When you look at the M&A space, why you do that. Um, because a lot of them don't go through at all. Like, you get all the way through due diligence and sometimes even integration, even after you have a purchase and sales agreement and something goes bad and it's gone. So most times employees do not know. There are always key employees in the organization who know, who we typically have sign a confidentiality agreement and often have a transaction bonus or some form of of some funding associated remuneration to be able to navigate through that process.
Okay, interesting.
So that's typically how that plays out. At the time, though, what usually happens, or what a lot of time happens, is people start getting their spidey sense, and then your employees start to put point A, point B together. Oh, all of a sudden we've had all these site tours. Like, why is that happening? Or, oh, all of a sudden we have to pull together a whole bunch of documentation and we're not really being told why. It feels like an audit, but if it was an audit, somebody would tell us, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of employees are pretty intuitive. And so the question that I always ask is, what is embedded in our culture? How do we talk about these things? So some organizations grow through acquisitions. It's part of their business strategy. It just is what it is, what it is. And so employees technically seem to know, because of the pace and the frequency of going through those processes, that they're like, oh yeah, it feels like we're we're set to be sold or we're set to buy, right? You can hear the people will talk about that, not necessarily knowing the details. In other organizations, especially when you're looking at a full swale sweep, right? Taking a full organization, not necessarily carving it up. Um, there's more sensitivities to that, because the moment you have a little bit of disgruntledness within the organization, that's when things can go sideways.
Mm,
And so it comes to, when is the right time. And sometimes you just sense that there's something going on and you pull employees aside and you have a
mm.
conversation. Sometimes the top tier of the organization may know, like the executive team knows, one layer down may know, and you find ways to be able to create more invisibility to the fact that you're going through the due diligence. But
Mm. Okay, interesting. What HR factors could derail a sale?
well, it depends on what kind of sale you're talking about. So some HR factors would never, right? Like if you're thinking about selling an asset,
Yeah.
see nothing from an HR perspective. Sometimes you'll see some things that cause organizations to pause from a culture perspective. Lots of lawsuits, employment lawsuits, um, termination without cause, high disability ratings, right? Like
Right.
unproportional to the event. So you're like, oh, is there a productivity issue? Why is everybody off at stress leave? Uh, that kind of stuff. High level, especially if you're in a very safety focused field, or industry, high levels of injuries or incidents in the workplace could mean that there's a lack of a safety culture, and for that, the organization may step aside. So that's kind of people-y.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
a lot of times also, like when you take a look, especially if you're unionized or you're not unionized. So let's say you're not unionized, there is risk if you're going to acquire a company that has a different labor, a philosophy, or a portfolio than what you have. So sometimes there's really big pension liabilities that are associated with union contracts. A lot of employees don't have a pension program, but union employees who are organized most of the time do. And so some of those locals and those, I guess more than the locals, some of those unions actually have unfunded liabilities that would be a huge um, financial infusion of cash if you chose to buy them.
Mhm.
For the most part, though, for the most part, there is a mechanism to navigate through most of the people issues if the organization is really hungry and if that's really important to their strategic imperative. A lot of it comes down to cost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you're purchasing something, does it feel like you're getting the right return? And can you get the synergies and the return on the investment in a relatively short period of time to make that transaction viable?
This is fascinating.
I love this stuff.
We've mostly talked about like the actual sale. But what thoughts do you have about challenges post-merger? You hear about like, merging one culture with another culture, and it's like it's a mess. No people quitting. What thoughts do you have or advice do you have about that aspect of this?
Mm. Prepare for the unexpected. I think whenever I know, you prepare for the unexpected.
Or do you mentally prepare yourself? Is there something you can actually do?
Oh, you do a whole bunch of things. So I think
Kidding.
the first thing is you need to mentally prepare. When you're going through due diligence, you will never know all of the knowing.
Yeah.
We all know this in HR, right? You unpeel one portion of the onion and you're like, "Ooh, didn't see that one coming," right? "Oh, that's tied to over here. I should go search there," right? Because when you're going through due diligence, you really don't have full access to seeing how the organization really operates. So that's number one. You need to prepare and just know you are going to have, you're going to experience a whole bunch of roadblocks and train wrecks along the way. I think that's the first thing. That's where I find a lot of fun. I'm an optimizer. I love that stuff. I'm like, bring it on. Let me see how we can get more efficient at this. But the second piece is I say communicate, communicate, communicate. And when you think you've communicated enough, you need to over communicate some more. And, many employees who are going through this process, there's a couple things that happen. Employees who are left behind or unfortunately lose their role in this process. A lot of individuals who go with the transaction are still friends or acquaintances with those individuals. So often you hear things about survivor guilt. Why did I survive? Why was I the one who got to go? Why wasn't, that kind of piece? Or why am I lucky enough that I got to stay in some circumstances, not have to go with the transaction? Um, so you have the emotional component. Two, I think it's really interesting when you think about the employment process. The employee has a lot of control through the majority of the employment process activities, right? You want a job, you go apply for one. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I like that culture. Oh, I like what that looks like. And so an employee has a lot more choice when it comes to your day to day job search. But when you are part of a transaction and you move from one company today and tomorrow you work for another employer and you didn't really get a chance to navigate through that, you may have some reasons why that culture doesn't work or those work practices don't work for you. That makes it hard because now you have to make a decision. Am I going to stick it out and see if it's going to get better because it's a little bit of a train wreck? Um, or it feels like it's okay, but I don't believe it, right? You also go through some of that. Or am I going to start looking tomorrow? Right? So you have kind of that with the existing employees. And then you have I also think about the pockets of culture, the pockets of the clickiness, right? So I was an old organization, you're the new Do I trust you? Do I not trust you? Oh, you're telling me to do things differently, but I know that's not going to work because I know this business. You don't know this business. And so being able to facilitate conversations to get what is not being said on the table in a respectful format, and then being really clear and intentional as to what is negotiable and what is not, because some things are just not negotiable. Like, you are going to use this new payroll system or you are not going to get paid. It's just that simple. Or, hey, the mechanism in which we navigate through that, payroll system, I'm up to hearing how you think we can make it better, right? So that's kind of negotiable. Hey, come play with me and let's figure out how to make it work based on your experiences and what we have to do. You have to use the system is non-negotiable. So being very, very clear about what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. And I think you always have to remember, I think all or everybody has to remember that this isn't as easy as you think it is. And the challenge with people integration is it goes underground. The hard, tangible things you can see, they pop up, right? You have a payroll discrepancy. Oh, you have somebody who goes on disability because they're stressed. Oh, you have a poor performance appraisal, right? These things are like more tangible, factual, for the most part, pieces of data that you get your hands around. A lot of times, the stuff that goes underground is much more difficult to manage because you can't see it, you just feel it, but you don't really know where it's coming from and why it's coming there. And so just be prepared that it can't just all be about what does the data say? What does the process say? Sometimes you just have to get out and walk around and just feel and go to that water cooler and just stand and ask how people are doing or navigate in the lunchroom. Like, if there's one thing that could change, what would that look like? And gather what I call the organizational sensing information. I sense that something's not right. What does that feel like? How big of an issue is it? And what do we want to do about it? Because sometimes organizations can choose to do nothing. And then sometimes leadership's going to lean in really, really hard and find a way to ensure that there's clarity and transparency in the mission and vision and get people aligned.
Okay. We're at the end of this. If someone wanted to learn more about doing this sort of thing, what do you suggest? One. And two, where can they find you if they would like to talk to you more about this?
Ooh, what do I suggest? I always start with understanding the why and understanding the business and then reverse engineering. And I think there's a lot of really great books and concepts about M&A and what's gone well and what hasn't gone well. I think some of it is just basically exposure because a lot of those books are roadmaps and they say, hey, do these things. And until you've actually been in it and feel it, it's a little tricky. And so sometimes having your pool of individuals who have liked experience, who have been in a similar kind of industry or type of transaction, they can give you some insight. In terms of where you can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Osmond, located in Calgary, and you should be able to track me down.
Okay. Well, thanks, Lindsay. That was amazing. That really was quite something. The way you linked the details to the strategy, to the business, and the connection that HR has in making an organization sellable. It really gives you a sense of what HR is doing to add value to a company. I've done another episode on mergers and acquisitions and doing actually survey work to understand the culture you're getting, because my last guest thought something similar around culture, and a link to that is right here. Thanks for watching out there, and we'll see you next time.